Chapter 13 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 13. The sight of Joanna froze Parago into momentary sobriety. He stood rigid for a few seconds, and then swayed into a chair by one of the tables, and sat with his head in his hands. I went up to Joanna. "He can't come tonight, madame." "Why not?" "He's not fit." As she realized my meaning, a look of great pain and repulsion passed over her face. "But he must come. Perhaps he will be better presently. You will accompany us and help me, Mr. Asticot, won't you?" As usual, the frost melted from her eyes, and her voice, the silvery English voice, went to my heart. I bent over Parago and whispered. "Take her from this pigsty and the sight of the hog," muttered Parago. His hands were clenched in a mighty effort to concentrate his wits. Joanna approached and touched him on the shoulder. "Gaston!" Suddenly he relaxed his grip and broke into a stupid laugh. "Very well, what does it matter? Sorry I haven't got velveteen suit." "What does he say?" she asked, turning to me. "That he will come, madame," said I. Hercule aided me to frog-march him out of the café and across the pavement to the waiting carriage. Joanna took her seat by his side, and I sat opposite. Hercule shut the carriage door, and we drove off. Parago relapsed into stupor. "I don't know how to ask you to forgive me, Mr. Asticot, for keeping you out of your bed at this time of night," said Joanna. "But I am very friendless here in Paris." We went along the Boul' Mich' by the quay to the Pont de la Concorde, crossed the vast and now silent expanse of the Place de la Concorde, and, going by the Rue Royale and the long dull Boulevard Malesherbes and the Boulevard Haussmann, entered the Avenue de Messine. It is a long drive under the most cheerful circumstances, but at 1 o'clock in the morning, in the company of the dearest thing in the world to me half drunk, and the dear lady whom he worshipped horrified and disgusted at the thought thereof, it seemed interminable. At last we arrived at number 7. At my ring the door swung open, drawn by the concierge within. I helped Parago out of the carriage. He made a desperate effort to stand and walk steadily. Heaven knows how he managed to clamber with not too great indecency up the stairs to the Comte de Verney's flat on the first floor. Joanna opened the door with her latchkey, and we entered a softly lit drawing-room. "Let me sit down," said Parago. "I shall be better presently." He sank, an ashamed heap, on a sofa by the wall, and with his fingers through his long black hair fought for mastery over his intoxication. The Comtesse de Verney left us, and presently returned, having taken off her hat and evening wrap. She brought a little silver tray with Madeira wine and biscuits. "We need something, Mr. Asticot," she said graciously. We drank the wine, and sat down to wait for Parago's recovery. Although it was late May, a wood fire glowed beneath the great chimney-piece. This, made of blue and white ware, with corbels of cherubs, caught my attention. I had seen things like it in the stately museums of Italy. "But this is Della Robbia!" I exclaimed. She smiled, somewhat surprised. "You are a connoisseur as well as a philosopher, Mr. Asticot. Yes, it is Della Robbia. The Comte de Verney is a great collector." Then for the first time I looked about the room, and I caught my breath as I realized its wealth and luxury. For a time I forgot Parago, lost in a dream of Florentine tapestries, priceless cabinets, porcelain, silver, pictures, richly toned rugs, chairs with rhythmic lines, all softened into harmonious mystery by the shaded light of the lamps. At the end of a further room, just visible through the looped curtains, a great piece of statuary gleamed white. I had never entered such a room in my life before. My master had taken me through the show apartments of great houses and palaces, but they were uninhabited, wanted the human touch. It had not occurred to me that men and women could have such wonder as their daily environment, or could invest it with the indefinable charm of intimacy. I turned and looked at Joanna as she sat by the Della Robbia chimney-piece, gracious and distinguished. And Joanna became merged in the Countess de Verneuil, the great lady, as far removed from me as my little bare attic from this treasure house of luxury. She wore the room, so to speak, as I wore the attic. Overcome by sudden timidity, I could barely reply to her remarks. She was in no mood for conversation, poor lady, so there dropped upon us a dead silence, during which she stared frozenly into the fire, while I, afraid to move, occupied the time by storing in my memory every bewitching detail of her dress and person. The oil sketch of her I made a day or two afterwards hangs before me as I write these lines. I prided myself on having caught the colour of her hair, black, with the blue reflections like the blue of cigarette smoke. Suddenly the quietness was startled by loud groans of agony and unintelligible speech coming from some room of the flat. Parago staggered noisily to his feet, a shaking, hairy, dishevelled spectre, blinking glazed eyes. Madame de Verneuil started and leaned forward, her hands on the arm of her chair. "My husband," she whispered, and for a few seconds we all listened to the unearthly sounds. Then she rose and turned to me. "You had better see it through." She crossed to Parago. "Are you better now?" "I can do what is required of me," said my master, humbly, though in his ordinary voice. He was practically sober. "Then come," said Joanna. We followed her out of the room, through softly carpeted corridors full of pictures and statues and beautiful vases, and entered a dimly lit bedroom. The nurse rose from a chair by the bed, where lay a bald-headed, beaky-nosed man, groaning and raving in some terrible madness. Joanna gripped my arm as Parago went to the bedside. "I am Gaston de Nerac," said he. The Comte de Verneuil raised himself on his elbow and looked at him in a wild way. I too should have liked to grip someone's arm, for the sight of the man sent a shudder through me. But I braced myself up under the consoling idea that I was protecting Joanna. "You are not dead, then? I did not kill you?" said the Comte de Verneuil. "No, since I am here to tell you that I am alive." The sweat poured off the man's face. He lay back, exhausted. "I do not know why," he gasped, "but I thought I had killed you." He closed his eyes. "That is enough," said the nurse. Without a word we all returned to the drawing-room. It was an astounding comedy. "I am grateful," said Joanna to my master. "I wish there was some means of repaying you." "I thought," said he, with a touch of irony which she did not notice, "that it was I who was paying for a wrong I did you." She drew herself up and surveyed him from head to foot with a little air of disdain. "I forget," she said icily, "that you ever did me any wrong." "And I can't," said he. "I wish to heaven I could. You beheld me tonight in the process of trying. An unedifying sight for Madame la Comtesse de Verneuil." "An unedifying sight for anybody," said Joanna. He bowed his head. Something pathetic in his attitude touched her. She was a tender-hearted woman. Her hand caught his sleeve. "Gaston, why have you come down to this? You, of all men?" "Because I am the one poor fool of all poor fools who takes life seriously." Joanna sighed. "I can't understand you." "Is there any necessity?" "You belong to a time when one wanted to understand everything. Now nothing much matters. But curiously, in your case, the desire has returned." "You understand me well enough to be sure that when you wanted me I would be at your service." "I don't know," she said. "It was a desperate resort to save my husband's reason." "Oh, come," she cried, moving to the chairs by the fire. "Let us sit and talk for 5 minutes. The other times you came and went, and we scarcely spoke a word. Besides," with a forced laugh, "it would not have been convenable. Now Mr. Asticot is here as chaperon. It doesn't seem like real life, does it, that you and I should be here? It is like some grotesque dream in which all sorts of incoherences are mixed up together. Don't you at least find it interesting?" "As interesting as toothache," replied Parago. "If it is pain for you to talk to me, Gaston, I will not detain you," said Joanna, rising from her chair. "Forgive me," said he. "I suppose my manners have gone with the rest. You may help me to recover them if you allow me to talk to you." He passed his hand wearily over his face, which, during the last minute or two, had been overspread by a queer pallor. He looked ghastly. "Tell me," said he, "why you come to that boozing ken of a place. A note would reach me, and I would obey." He explained that there was no time for letter writing. The Comte's attacks came on suddenly, at night. To soothe him, it was necessary to find the chief actor in the absurd comedy at once, at any cost to her reputation. Besides, what did it matter? The only person who knew of her escapade was the coachman, an old family servant of the Comte, as discreet as death. "How long have these attacks been going on?" asked my master. Joanna poured out her story, with the pathetic eagerness of a woman who has kept hateful secrets in her heart too long, and at last finds a human soul in whom she can confide. I think she almost forgot my presence, for I sat modestly apart, separated from them by the wide cone of light cast by the shaded lamp. The first symptoms of mental derangement, she said, had manifested themselves 2 years ago. They had gradually increased in frequency and intensity. During the interval, the Comte de Verneuil went about the world a sane man. The attacks, as she had explained, came on suddenly, always at night, and his fixed idea was that he had killed Gaston de Nerac. Before Paragot had appeared, they lasted 2 or 3 days, till they spent themselves, leaving the patient in great bodily prostration. When she had met me taking the spring outside the Hotel Bristol, a wild idea had entered her head that the confrontation of the Comte with the living Gaston de Nerac might end his madness. On the occasion of the next attack, she had rushed in eager search for Paragot, had brought him to the raving bedside, and the result had been magical. She had thought the cure permanent, but a fortnight later the attack returned, as it had returned again and again, and as it had returned tonight. "It is charitable of you to have come, Gaston," she said in her sweet way, "and I must ask you to forgive me for anything unkind I may have said." He made some reply in a low voice, which I did not hear, and for a little time their talk was pitched in the same tone. I began to grow sleepy. I roused myself with a jerk to hear Joanna say, "Why did you play that detestable tune from Orphée aux Enfers?" "To see if you would recognize it. Some mocking devil prompted me. It was the last tune you and I heard together, the night of our engagement party. The band played it in the garden." "Don't, don't!" exclaimed Joanna, putting up her hands to her face. This, then, was why each had cried out at Aix-les-Bains against the merry little tune. It was interesting. I saw, however, that it must have jangled horribly on tense nerves. She dashed away her hands suddenly and strained her face towards him. "Why, Gaston? Why did you?" He rose with a deprecating gesture, and there was a hunted look in his eyes. During all this strange scene he was no longer Paragot, my master, but Gaston de Nerac, whom I did not know. His wild, picturesque speech, his dear vagabond manner, had gone. The haggardness of some desperate illness changed his features, and I grew frightened. I came to his side. "Master, we must take a cab. Have you any money?" "Yes," he said faintly. "Let us go home." "But you are ill. You look as white as a ghost," cried Joanna in alarm. "I had a dinner of herbs, in the liquid form of absinthe," said my master, with a clutch at Paragot. "How does it go? Better a dinner of herbs where love is—" "Ah, monsieur has not yet gone," said the nurse, hurrying into the room. "Monsieur le Comte begs me to give this to monsieur." She held out a letter. "Monsieur le Comte made me open his dispatch box, madame," she added apologetically. She left the room. Paragot stood twirling the letter between his fingers. Joanna bade him open it. It might be something important. Paragot drew from the envelope half a sheet of notepaper. He looked at it, made a staggering step to the door, and fell, sprawling prone upon the carpet. Joanna uttered a little cry of fright, and, as I did, cast herself on her knees beside him. He had fainted. Abstinence from food, drink, his tremendous effort of will towards sobriety, the strain of the interview, had brought him to the verge of the precipice, and it only required the shock of the letter to send him toppling over. He propped his head on cushions and loosened his collar. "What can we do?" gasped my dear lady. "I will call the nurse from Monsieur Lecomte's room," said I. "She will know," said Joanna hopefully. I went to the Comte's room, opened the door, and beckoned to the nurse. She gave a glance at her sleeping patient and joined me in the corridor. On my explanation, she brought water and sal volatile, and returned with me to the drawing-room. It was a night of stupefying surprises. The courtier would have called it abracadabra, and they would not have been far wrong. There was necromancy in the air. I felt it as I followed the nurse across the threshold. I anticipated something odd, some grotesque development. In the atmosphere of those I loved in those days, I was as sensitive as a barometer. Arago lay, still as death, his wild, hairy head on the satin cushions. But Joanna was crouching on her knees in the midst of the cone of light cast by the shaded lamp, reading, with parted lips and blanched face, the half-sheet of notepaper. As we entered, she turned and looked at me, and her eyes were frozen hard blue. The nurse bent over my master's side. Joanna stretched out her arms full length towards me. "Read," she cried, and her voice was harsh, with no silvery tone in it at all. I took the paper wonderingly from her fingers. Why she should have shown it to me, the wretched little pasty-faced, gutter-bred art student, I could not conceive for many of the after years during which I wrestled with the head and heart-splitting perplexities of women. But experience has taught me that human beings, of whichever sex they may be, will do amazing things in times of spiritual upheaval. I have known the primmest of vicars' churchwardens curse like a coal-heaver when a new incumbent chose in his stead a less prim man than he. I was just a human entity, I suppose, who had strayed into the sacred and intimate sphere of her life, the only one perhaps in the world who had done so. She was stricken to the soul. Instinct compelled my sharing of her pain. She commanded me to read. I was only 19. Had she commanded me to drink up Icel or eat a crocodile, I would have done it. I read. The address of the letter was Eaton Square, the date the 20th of June, 13 years before. The wording as follows. In consideration of the sum of £10,000, I, the undersigned Gaston de Nerac, promise and undertake from this moment not to hold any communication by word or writing with Miss Joanna Rushworth for the space of 2 years, that is to say, until midnight of the 20th of June, 1823. Should, however, Miss Joanna Rushworth be married in the meantime, I solemnly undertake on my honour as a gentleman, not of my own free will, to hold any communication with her whatsoever as long as I live, or, should circumstances force us to meet, not to acquaint her in any way with the terms of this agreement, whereof I hold myself bound by the spirit as well as by the letter. Gaston de Nerac. My young and unpractised mind required some minutes to realize the meaning of this precious agreement. When it had done so, I stared blankly at Joanna. The nurse, in her business-like fashion, drew the curtains and flung the French windows wide open. "He has only fainted. He will soon come round." She returned to Parago's side. Joanna and I remained staring at each other. She rose, took me by the sleeve, and dragged me to the fireplace. "The writing is my husband's," she said in a whisper. "The signature is his," pointing to Parago. "He sold me to my husband for £10,000 on the evening of our engagement party. What am I to do? I haven't a friend in this hateful country." I longed to tell her she had at least one friend, but as I could neither help nor advise her, I said nothing. "No wonder he has a banking account," she said with a bitter laugh. I noticed then that a strained woman's humour is unpleasant. She sat down. The corners of her kind lips quivered. "The world is turned upside down," she said piteously. "There's no love, honour, or loyalty in it. I felt this evening as if I could forgive him. But now—" She rose and wrung her hands and exclaimed sharply, "Oh, it's hateful! It's hateful for men to be so base!" That it was a base action to sell Joanna for any sum of money, however bewildering in largeness, I could not deny. But that Parago should be guilty of it, I would not have believed had the accusation come from Joanna's own lips. The confounded scrap of paper, however, was proof. Therein he pledged himself to give up Joanna for £10,000, and the scaly-headed vulture had paid the money. I turned away sadly, and went to help the nurse minister to my master. He opened his eyes, and whispered that I must fetch a cab. "Or a dung-cart," he added characteristically. Glad of action, I went out into the long, quiet avenue, and, after 5 minutes' walk, hailed a passing fiacre. The nurse admitted me when I rang the bell. I found Padago sitting on the sofa by the wall, and Joanna where I had left her, by the Della Robbia chimney-piece. Apparently they had not had a very companionable 5 minutes. He rose as I entered. "I thought you were never coming," said he. "Let us go." "I must say good-bye to Madame." "Be quick about it," he whispered. I crossed the room to Joanna's chair, and made a French bow according to my instruction in manners. "Good night, Madame." She held out her hand to me, such a delicate, soft little hand, but quite cold and nerveless. "Good night, Mr. Astico. I'm sorry our friendship has been so short." I joined Padago. He said from where he stood by the door, "Good night, Madame la Comtesse." She made no reply. Instinctively, both of us lingered a second on the threshold, filling our eyes with the beauty and luxury that were all part and parcel of Joanna, and, as the door closed behind us, we felt like two bad angels turned out of paradise. End of chapter 13.